in our next pairing about communication. We have Terry Real, and Terry is the developer of the relational model, one of the very important models about couples therapy, and has written extensively on these topics. And then he'll be followed by Harville Hendricks and Helen Hunt. Harville and Helen, of course, developing the Imago model. So Terry, are you ready? And can you take it away from here?
Rock and rolling. Okay, listen, I want to tell everybody what a joy it is to be here. I'm going to speak quickly because I've only got 20 minutes. I want to tell you that it's a great thrill to be here with Harville and Helen, two great pioneers, as everyone knows. And it's great to be here in the midst of this COVID-19 disaster. I feel like this video conference is joining the Italians who are singing on their balcony. And it's a form of resistance, which we all need as a community and as individuals. So let me get right to it. For those of you who do not know my relational model, Relational Life Therapy, let me say that it occurs in 3 phases. The first phase I call waking up the client, or joining through the truth. And I'll double back on that. But this is when you lovingly confront what the person is doing in the relationship that's getting in their own way, that's blowing their own foot off. The second phase, once I get the dysfunctional relational stance, is to move it back into family of origin. Where did you learn this from? How did this get formed? And then the third phase is teaching and skills. Now that we know what you've done that's wrong, let's talk about what right looks like. And let's move into giving you alternatives very concretely. I think that it's a combination of all 3 of these. The confrontation, the loving confrontation, the inner child, family of origin, trauma work, and then the skill building and strength building, all 3 together makes for profound change quickly in my model. And I frankly don't know any other work that does all 3. Gottman, until recently, I think, has added trauma, but it was mostly skills. And well, we don't need to get into it, but it's this rhythm of alerting the person to what they're doing wrong, each of the 2 partners, going back into family of origin and childhood and figuring out where that comes from, and doing trauma work. We do deep trauma work in the presence of the partner. We don't farm trauma out to another therapist. And then once those 2 are accomplished, giving them skills and teaching specifics that will carry the day. So I want to say, particularly since Harville and Helen are here, this is not primarily coaching the couple to have conversations with one another. It's different than that. It's really spoke of the wheel. You talk to me, and then you talk to me, and then you talk to me, and you talk to me. I only have the couple turn and face each other and talk to each other in very formal, stylized, structured ways where I know it's going to go well. What I don't do is the old structural move of having them turn to each other and have the fight they have at home without disrupting it. And I don't know any good couples therapist who would do differently than that. Anyway, we're not positioned above the system working on it. I'm not a coach to the couple per se. I am, instead, I form a 3-person system. I am a subcomponent part of the ecology of the new system formed by the 3 of us. And I have capacities that they don't have, so that the 3 of us now have capacities that the 2 of them did not have. Since I'm a subcomponent part of the system, I'm a person to the people I'm working with. Relational life therapy works by equipping our clients to live relational lives, lives of authentic connection to themselves and to others. And I don't know how to equip somebody to live a relational life without being relational with them while I do it. So we're not experts. Chikine and the old Milan team used to say, love your hypothesis, be passionate about your hypothesis, but don't marry your hypothesis. In relational life therapy, RLT, the therapist takes a position, tries something out, sees what you get. If you like what you get, sustain it. Most therapists jump around too much. If you're getting somewhere, hold tight. If you don't like what you're getting, if they're resistant or they pull back or they feel like they're not trusting you, then switch and move to a different position. So the values are relational. It's about seeing what's in front of you, taking in the feedback, and moving with that feedback in the course of the conversation together. We are people with the people that we are working with. We completely abandoned the myth of neutrality. I don't believe neutrality exists, and we certainly don't use it as an ideal. We're out of that professional box. All RLT therapists judiciously self-disclose. I talk about my marriage. I talk about my rage. Formerly, I talk about my dysfunctional family. I've written about it. All RLT therapists talk like that. If you come from a dysfunctional culture, so do I. If you come from a dysfunctional family, well, so did I. And the skills that we're working on now are the same skills that my wife Belinda and I use every day. And on those days when we don't, when we indulge our immature selves, we look just as ugly as you do. Couples love hearing that from therapists. So we're people with our people. The other abandoning of neutrality is that we take sides. When I was first learning couples therapy, the cardinal rule was thou shalt not take sides. If you lost your neutrality and sided with one partner against another, particularly sided with a man against a woman or a woman against a man, then you had to go to your supervisor and talk a while about your mother. And then when you regained your neutrality, you could go back into the fray again. Not all problems are 50-50. Some problems are 70-30. Some problems are 99-1. I treated a couple where the man was a bipolar, raging, untreated alcoholic, not on medication for his bipolar disorder. And I honestly believe that the woman's quote unquote contribution to their choreography was that she happened to be there. This was the feminist critique of systemic family therapy. You don't talk to an abused woman, for example, in a domestic violence case about her contribution to the violence. That is grotesque. So not all problems are 50-50. And specifically, we look at power imbalances in the couple when there aren't. Some couples are truly 50-50, but many are not. There are many power imbalances in couples, and when we see them, we correct them. I have a saying, we want the weak to stand up, we want the mighty to melt. And this has to do with our attention to issues of grandiosity as well as shame. For 50 years, we paid attention to helping people come up from shame, and we've done a terrible job of helping people come down from the other self-esteem disorder, not inferiority, but superiority. And I believe that in order to move men and women into increased intimacy, you must not just move people up from the one down, but down from the one up so that they can truly be with one another. You cannot be intimate from either the one down or the one up position. The method that we use in this early phase of waking up the client, we call joining through the truth. And this is once you have your perception of what's true and what's not true. It's your humble perception, but you do have a lot of experience. Once you have your perception of what's true and what's not true, then you can move into a loving confrontation with the grandiose partner that is so skilled and so respectful and so on their side that they actually feel closer to you and more trusting of you because of the telling of the difficult truths than they would if you had soft pedaled it. And I believe that most couples therapy and most therapy in general treats difficult clients with kid gloves, tries to win them through nurture, 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 and loses the sense of helping them move through the truth. So joining through the truth. In order to understand joining through the truth, you have to understand the three parts of the psyche as we see it in RLT, Relational Life Therapy. The first part is the functional adult, prefrontal cortex. The part of you that can stop and think, that can be intentional, that can choose a different reaction than the one that is your default. The great spiritual teacher Krishnamurti once said, true liberation is freedom from our own automatic responses. And the functional adult part of you is the part of you that can move beyond your automatic, what we would now often say, triggered responses. On the other side of the brain, the limbic system, amygdala, is the wounded child, usually perceived as a very small, young, 0 to 5, 6. And that's the part of us, and this is parts work. We've been doing parts work for almost 40 years. That's the part of us that was on the receiving end of the abuse or neglect and is just tends to be overwhelmed. Between these two is the adaptive child, usually an older part, 5, 6, 7, all the way up into the 20s. This is the part that shaped itself in reaction to whatever the neglect or the abuse was that you were subject to. I have a saying, show me the thumbprint and I'll tell you about the thumb. For example, I have never met a passive-aggressive person in my 40 years of work who didn't grow up in a family where, had they been openly aggressive, they wouldn't have gotten the snot kicked out of them, either emotionally or physically or both. That passive aggression was an adaptation to the oppression that the child was living under. That's the adaptive child. Now, what is our work? Our work is to lend our functioning adult to their egos in a way that pulls forth and forms an alliance with the functioning adult parts of them. It is you and me in alliance to deal with that pesky adaptive child part of you. We're not harsh. You don't meet harshness with harshness. You meet harshness with loving firmness. There is nothing that harshness does that loving firmness doesn't do better. So we're not harsh to these parts of ourselves. But we are firm with these parts of ourselves. I like to say when an inner child kicks up, you want to put your arms around them, put them on your lap, listen to them, love them, and take their sticky hands off the steering wheel. You in the back seat. I don't want you messing with my wife. I can do it better than you can. So these parts of us are moved beyond. And the sudden shift from living out of our adaptive child, which is what most of us do, to moving into that thoughtful prefrontal cortex. That is what I call relational mindfulness. I believe it's a spiritual moment, it's an intentional moment, and it's not all that different from other forms of mindfulness. It's just bringing mindfulness into our own psychology. Let me give you an example. Bill is a liar. Bill has been a liar his entire life. His wife is about to divorce him because she cannot stand being lied to. Bill lies about everything, large and small. He's been a liar ever since he's been a little boy. Okay, so I have the dysfunctional relational stance. I have Bill's dysfunctional move. He is a pathological liar. Great. Now let's take that back to family of origin. Now we're in phase 2. Where did that come from? Well, Bill had an extraordinarily dominating, controlling, offensive, and abusive father. He learned to lie in order to preserve whatever shreds of autonomy and integrity his father would possibly allow. If he had not lied, he probably would have gone under and either been a drug abuser or depressed or whatever. But certainly that adaptation served him well at the time. But I have a saying, adaptive then, maladaptive now. Lying to his father was exactly the thing that he needed to do. Lying to his wife is exactly the thing that's going to land him divorced. So how do we deal with that? So I talked to him about it, and we talked. And we talk about second consciousness, relational mindfulness, shifting out of that automatic default of lying to something different. About 2 months into the therapy, the couple comes in and they tell me this story. Over the weekend, Bill's wife had asked him to bring some groceries home. She had a list. And he brought home 9 out of the 10 items today. He forgot the 10th. Where is the milk? She says. And he describes on the tip of his lips is they were out of it. And on this day, he takes a breath, he gathers his courage, he looks at his wife and says, I forgot it. And she burst into tears. And she says, I've been waiting for this moment for 25 years. That's recovery. Shifting out of the adaptation into the functional adult, bringing the prefrontal cortex into relationship with the triggered limbic system. So both are present at the same time and choosing something new and different. That's what we're looking for in our couples therapy. I want to say just a word about inner child work. Inner child work is often empty chair, really deep. You know, you get back to that 4-year-old, back to that 5-year-old, and you're forming a relationship with it. You're talking to that little boy. He's talking to you. It's deeply emotional, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't always have to be like that. So I thought I'd give you an example of both taking sides, joining through the truth, and doing inner child work in the space of a few minutes. It's about Harry. Harry and Sue come to me, and it's a typical he said, she said. There isn't one presenting problem when a couple comes to you, there's two. There is partner A's version and partner B's version, and it's important to understand that so that you understand what the competing agendas are for you. So they had different realities. What is Sue's reality? Well, Harry was a brute. What was Harry's reality? Well, Sue was a ditz. Okay, Harry, we always go for specifics. This is called making their realities collide. Harry, give me 3 examples of Sue being a ditz. Well, she's often late, often 15 minutes late, rarely apologizes, forgets things, loses things. She's a big pain in the butt. Okay. Sue, give me 3 examples of Harry being a brute. Well, just in the last 2 weeks, he called me the C word. He physically stood in the doorway and blocked my exit in the middle of the fight. And he spit on my windshield. So I always take the most egregious example. Harry, you spit on her windshield? Yeah, she says it was a real lunger too. I mean, it was really just, okay, I got it. I say to Harry, whoa. He says, well, you should have seen the way she was talking to me. I don't have to put up with that kind of crap. Pause. Beat. Most therapists talk too much. I let them silence the crew. Harry, I say to him, I don't know. I barely know you, but it occurs to me you don't know the difference between standing up for yourself and savaging somebody. That kind of rocked him back on his heels a little. Then phase 2. Where did this come from? Who was the angry one in your family growing up? I ask him. True story. He says, my father. I say, tell me about it. He says, he was terrible. When he came on board, everybody's, where was your mother? Oh, she didn't. In fact, I'm the one who protected my sister, he tells me. I used to lock her up in the basement when he came home. And don't get me wrong, he said, it was a finished basement, had coloring books and videos, but I kept her out of harm's way. I said, how old was she? 4. How old were you? 6. Harry, I don't know. I wasn't there, and you all can forgive my language, but this is what I said. It seems to me that there was a 6-year-old version of something like looking at your father and saying to yourself, you lay a fucking hand on my sister and I will kill you. Yeah, that's exactly how I felt. That's exactly how it was. How did I know that? I asked him. Okay, I'll bite. How did you know that? Because, I say, you defend yourself like an angry 6-year-old. Will you let me help you find a way to stand up for yourself that isn't violent to everybody else? And Harry, bless his heart, true story, took a breath, looked at me and said, I think you better. That's joining through the truth. That is forming an alliance with the best part of Harry to deal with the grandiose, difficult, offensive behaviors. I can't tell you how many times I end the session looking at somebody and saying, you know what? You know what, Steve or Mary? Let's say Mary. You know what, Mary? You're a good woman. I have been with women who are bad to the bone. We call them sociopaths. And listen, they're cold, but you're warm. I talk to you, you nod, you smile, you take it in, you laugh. I feel like you're here. You're a good person. You know what's so sad, Mary, who's had multiple affairs over 20 years? You know what's so sad? I am talking to a decent person who has behaved indecently for the last 20 years. Will you let me rescue the real you from this nonsense? Who's going to say no to that? And they don't. That is joining through the truth, forming a therapeutic alliance, and creating a new story that is different from the one they walked in with, not a story that paints them into a corner, but a story that opens up to new possibilities. I'm done.
Great job, Terry. Wonderful. Yeah, Terry, talk a little bit about some of the intricacies of your model. There's a balance between coming in with a focal problem and also working with dynamics that happen in the relationship. How do you balance those two things?
Well, again, just saying that it's not all 50-50 doesn't mean that it's not all 99-1 either. For example, I was dealing with a grandiose woman, and and she was verbally abusive and loud and screaming and all the rest. I have a saying: an angry woman is generally a woman who doesn't feel heard. And in fact, it was one of these systemic deals where the more she screamed, the more he shut down. The more he shut down, the more she screamed. And the intervention was to turn to her and say to her, hey, listen, I have a saying, an angry woman is a woman who doesn't feel heard. I think that your escalations are attempts at communication. I've got great news for you today. You've been heard. You've been heard. And here's how I talk about using the therapeutic self. You've been heard by me. I want you to know I've got them. Do you understand that I get them? I understand all of your complaints about them, and I'm willing to work on it with them. Yeah, I get that. Wonderful. Here's what I want you to do. Leave him to me. You don't have to yell and scream and get through to him anymore. I want you to relax and begin to enjoy the son of a gun. Whatever he does, you take note of, you bring it to me, you're in ongoing therapy, I'll deal with it. I can get through to him in ways you can't. And she calmed down. His part in it was being passive aggressive and withdrawn. And I immediately turned to him and started working on that. The best way to work with a grandiose woman, by the way, is to pay attention to your complaints about the other partner first. And then almost with your left hand say, hey, you can't do this anymore. You can't just shut down. Withdrawal is a losing strategy, blah, 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 blah. Oh, by the way, you can't keep yelling and screaming. Anyway, it's almost like with your left hand. You don't go frontal. Anyway, back to you, and back and forth and back and forth. So I'm not saying the systemic isn't real. I'm just saying that there are power imbalances. There are grandiose partners. And by and large, most couples therapy doesn't deal with either of those.
Terry, two questions. One question is about the overlap between narrative therapy, the therapy of Michael White, and RLT. And also another question about, do you work sometimes with individuals, or do you always have the couple together?
Let me do the first one. I'm very influenced by Michael White. There is a way in which it's parts work, and I'm externalizing the grandiose adaptive child part of you. The difference between Michael White and the work that I do, and I have to tip my hat to Dick Schwartz and IFS on this one, is I don't negatively connote the grandiose adaptive. It's an immature part of you. It's not something to fight with. It's something to listen to, learn from, love, and contain. It's like good parenting. So it is like Michael White in that there's an unblending in Dick Schwartz's word. There's a separation. It's unlike Michael White in that I'm not pivoting you against that person. I'm asking you to reparent that immature part of you with my help. The second question, do I work with individuals? Yes, I do work with individuals. However, when I work with individuals, I always, and all RLT therapists do this, have a line out to the partner. At least an hour-long phone call. Give me advice about how to work with your husband. Give me advice about how to work with your wife. What are the issues? What do I need to know? How would he change that would be pleasing to you? So you're an overt agent of the other person, and that's explicit. But the beauty in that is they spill the beans. They give you all the data that the individual might take 6 months to a year to tell you.
Terry, we have a bibliography for you, something that, because people are asking about the books that you've written, do we have that posted on the couplesconference.com site?
I'm not sure, frankly, if you do, but if you don't, I'll get it to you momentarily and we'll put it up.
Great. Send me a handout and we'll make it available on the site.
Okay, great. Happy to do that.
Terry, you're a very strong man, and you have been known more as being confrontive, especially with men, and more supportive of women. Is that an unfair characterization?
Absolutely unfair on many levels. I confront the offender. I confront the grandiose one. And I don't even like the word confrontation. I think that's too aggressive. The language I use is joining through the truth. Any fool can clobber their clients with the truth. The art is speaking the truth to them in a way that is so rooting for them, so in love with them, so wanting them to be healthy, that gets transmitted and they feel closer to you because, you've done a great RLT interview when at the end of it, one of my clients after an interview said, a gay client said, I feel splayed and filleted. He said, I feel like you got me. And that in a way is therapeutic empathy. It's not confrontation. It's telling the truth in a way that enlists the person to see the truth with you and to shift behaviors and traits that were very comfortable to something that they're suddenly holding at arm's length and have a little grain of salt about. You know what, says Harry, maybe I can learn how to stand up for myself in a new way. That's the transformation we're looking for.
Whitaker would say that you could do surgery, but if you're going to do surgery, there needs to be anesthetic. And you speak in very clear declarative sentences, but you care, and your caring comes across, and your commitment to truth comes across, and that creates an anesthetic that allows people to understand and to digest what it is that you're saying to them, helping them to get to the place where it is that they need to go.
My language for that, Jeffrey, is that it's about connection. It's about authentic connection. And I'm reaching for somebody who has been disconnected often from the consequences of their own behaviors. And I'm pulling them with me into an open heart and a greater sense of connection, often releasing remorse. Oh my God, I see what I did. I'm so sorry. That's what I'm looking for. I don't know that I would think about it as bad medicine with anesthetic. I would think about it as pulling somebody in from outer space into the warmth of human accountability and connection.
Super, Terry. Great. And when you talk about grandiosity, well, can you say something about how you define grandiosity? Because I know that's an important part of your approach.
Yes, and I also want to go back and say something about my being a man. Most RLT therapists are women, and a woman needs simply to, as the Zen people say, take her seat. And if a woman can move into this with self-assertion and confidence, men and women both will come along. I have a saying, competence trumps gender. So women who are listening to this, do not disempower yourself and feel that only a man can do this work. Women do this work quite beautifully. And what was the other question?
About grandiosity, how you define
It's
grandiosity.
simple. It's inferiority, superiority. Feeling. Here's an interesting point. The emotion of grandiosity and the emotion of shame are not different emotions, but the same emotion in two different directions. And that emotion, Jeffrey, is contempt. When the flashlight of contempt goes into me, we call it shame. When it goes out to you, we call it grandiosity. But what I'm interested in is inviting the men and women I work with to step off the contempt conveyor belt, to live nonviolent lives between their ears and in their relationships with others.
Terry, we've heard from Ellen and from Joe about differentiation. Is there anything different that you would say about differentiation than they have talked about?
I just want to be careful to differentiate differentiation from a sort of concrete idea of separation. I do a lot of work with men in patriarchy. The patriarchal myth is that in order to achieve autonomy, a boy must separate from his mother and usually like move to the other side of the universe or something. That's a very concrete idea of separation. It's like, hey, Mr. Jones, what brings you here today? The bus. No, it's about sorting through the defaults that were given to you, keeping what is positive and giving back what was negative. There's that old saying in AA, pass it back or pass it on. Sifting through, deciding what is good and worth passing on to the next generation, deciding what is negative and needs to end with you. That's the work of differentiation, or said differently, of growing up.
Terry, great job. Thank you so much for taking your precious time to contribute to us.